Welcome back, LINHAC 2022. Little technical difficulties with the microphone, but hey, what can we do? We fixed it quickly, and Beck doing a great job behind the scenes. So here we go with the panel, entertainment business. Are you guys with me? Can you hear me?
We're here.
Gotcha.
Mike Kelly, 15 years, sports media. If you like the NHL, hey, you've seen Mike Kelly, you know who he is. Alison Lukan, she has got a great story. Been in Columbus, Ohio for many years. Now, I don't like people from Columbus, Ohio all that much because they're from Ohio State and we don't like that. And I'm a Michigan guy, but she went to Seattle and that makes things better. So, Alison, welcome to us.
Thank
Håkan,
you.
Håkan Södergren, what hasn't he done? Won the Swedish championships, been in the Olympics, coached a team, head of a league, and he's been on TV for years and knows all about the Swedish hockey world, but also international hockey. And then my former colleague, Björn Oldeen. This man taught me everything I know in front of the camera. I remember him helping me, teaching me, and we worked together for years, and I'm thankful to Björn that I have his experience when I'm standing here today. Everybody, welcome. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Fine.
Thank you much. Yeah, nice to be here.
This is the group that I think I don't have to say much. I can let you guys go, and then everyone can kind of take it their own way. So I'm kind of considering that I'm going to just shut up and then say, hey, start going. Hockey analytics. What's with this? It's growing. We've heard about it. We've heard about truths. We've heard about the different kind of filters that have to be used. We're talking about different ways to convince certain people that this is important. Other people, they understand this makes teams better. I'd like to talk about different situations, certainly what you've all seen from different angles when you're just looking from the outside in towards hockey teams, hockey players, hockey coaches, and how the game is getting better. Mike, you've been in the industry for a long time. I know you're also very interested in analytics due to the fact that you're involved in an analytics company. Tell me your relationship, and let's start at the beginning. Where did you start with hockey analytics? When did you say, this is important?
Yeah, no, I've always had an interest in statistics from the time I was a kid. So it's always just been something, a way to view sports that I've been interested in. And I was working about 7-8 years ago in media in hockey and working with a lot of players and doing shows with them and that kind of thing. And I just wanted to be as educated on the game as possible. When I'm talking to these guys or girls, they're talking about their experiences on the ice and how they see the game that way. I was working in television. I wanted to be able to bring something more to the table than just, okay, thank you, we'll be right back after this. Didn't think I had the pretty face to get by in a TV career that way for that long, just doing that. So I just wanted to try to understand the game as much as I could. I got connected with an analytics company that was doing some work in hockey as I just tried to dig in and see who's doing the best work, where's the best information. Not long after that, I got connected with the company that I'm currently at, SportLogic, and became such a believer in the value of this information for the teams, for players, for agents, coaches, etc., but also in how we discuss the game in the media and how we can bring the game to the fans, that I joined them full time, and that's where I've been since. So that's kind of a quick story on how I got involved in it. But for me, it's especially through the media, it's a phenomenal storytelling mechanism, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do is give fans a really interesting way to look at the game.
Björn, how many times did you tell me to learn to tell stories? That's what people want. They want to hear stories.
Exactly. You can use numbers behind them.
Alison, you've got a great story yourself. Can you tell the people that may not see you in the Seattle Kraken's lineup these days, tell them how you got there and a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, my story is definitely probably the most crazy of my colleagues here on this panel. I went to school for leadership studies and actually was a business and strategic planning consultant for many, many years, and just a longtime sports fan. I will say my only Ohio State alignment is with their hockey team, so hopefully that helps us a little bit there. But I was following hockey, and as I would go to games, as I would watch games, the numbers that were available to us didn't make sense. We were not counting all pucks going towards goaltenders. We were comparing seasons of players that were playing different amounts or in different roles or being asked to do different things, and then looking at the same totals to try and make a decision or a determination about players. And about that time is when the analytics revolution was happening in hockey. And I was also given the opportunity to start writing. And it just I really connected with this idea of analytics. And much like Mike just said, I really feel that our entry point, whether it be to a player, a coach, a fan of any knowledge level, is to connect what numbers inform about what our eyes see. And so it's never leading with the numbers. It's never leading with the data. It's explaining the why. It's digging deeper to more than just the pucks that go into the net or just what is happening with the player touching the puck. And so from there, I was a writer for a long, long time, and was fortunate enough this past season to be invited by the Seattle Kraken organization and Root Sports Northwest to join their broadcast team. And now it's been a real joy to really be able to comment real time on what's happening in the game and bring the use and the applicability to a whole new fan base, many of whom are very familiar with the game of hockey, of course, but NHL hockey is new primarily to that market. And so it's been really exciting that from the ground up, we get to tell these stories about a game that we love and a game that is passion and magic, but also can really be informed when we look at what the data tells us.
What has been the hardest when you go over to TV? The hardest thing to learn the first time you get on TV?
I think it is thinking that, I didn't know that I would ever be on TV. I didn't know that this was all going to be a thing that was happening. But other than that, I really, the instantaneous analysis, I was so used to being able to write and really go over video and do a lot of analysis. And the one struggle we have with a lot of our analytics today, because they are not being produced by the league, is that we're at the whim of how quickly we can get this information turned out by the resources that are able to provide it to us. So there are a lot of times the stories that we want to tell. If I'm writing, I have time to get that data. And sometimes we have to go without because our public resources just are not mature enough yet to answer the questions that we want to real time in a broadcast.
Håkan, eller Håkan, you've done it all. You've done it all in the world of hockey. What role haven't you had? The equipment manager, maybe, but my guess is when you've been injured, I bet you've been an equipment manager as well.
I got two kids. I know everything about material, even the cost of it.
Understand.
I was very interested about what Alison was saying here about the numbers, because when I started as a player, the first time you represented yourself in a contract discussion, you used the goals and assists and things like that and trying to get a better contract. And the general manager used different numbers to download the payment. And that's sort of what I think has developed numbers in a positive way, because when agents started representing players, they had to find numbers that, as Alison explained here, put the player in the right position, in the right way he played, and could in some way collect the different numbers and use the right numbers in the right situation. And I guess that's something that we in television has a problem with nowadays, because we are trying to use the numbers that people who watch TV could understand, but we have to teach them all that we have been taught during 10, 15, 10 years in 3.20 minutes often, because not everyone is watching 3 or 4, 5, 6 games a week like we do or we have to do. So very interesting pointer from Alison.
Björn, you've been in the TV and the hockey world for a long time now. It seems to time seems to fly. You've seen the statistics go to trying to show it on some kind of with colors and with lines and with things. Where did your relationship to analytics start?
I mean, I've always loved statistics, me also. But we started in Seymour, where I work. We started a program called Hockey Labbet, and where we analyze numbers from the Sport Logic, and we have analysts helping us with that. So that was a really, I almost fell in love with the numbers because finally had a guy who could explain everything to us. And not only me, I know coaches from the SHL talk, oh, I love this program. I mean, it's really narrow, of course. I mean, it's not going to be the biggest show in Sweden, not that many viewers. But starting to understand the game, where a shot, why a shot is good and why it's not, why it's bad, what the team can do to improve, and I also love the way we can evaluate performance. Is it sustainable? The team winning? Is it good in the long run, or is it just a stolen game? So I really enjoyed that. Learned a lot doing this and understanding the game and understanding the factors behind it much better.
Now, we've got about an hour and 15 minutes left, so we can talk and we can jump in. And if you guys all have the gift of gab, so help each other out and jump in. But I'm going to put the first question out there. When we talked to the analysts that work with the teams, they talked about a filter. And what they said was we need to create a filter from the numbers to the coaching staff, and then actually from the coaching staff probably to the players as well. How do you guys feel about finding these filters? Because just as you're all explaining, you're trying to tell a story, you're trying to help people understand the game. Do you think about the filters you're using when you're on TV?
Yeah, certainly. I'll jump in there. Yeah, I think, I won't speak for Alison, certainly, but she talks about her leadership background in business, and I have a background in communications. And, maybe one of the reasons why we found an entry point into this is because of our ability to communicate what we find. And I think that's so important. If it's certainly in media, I'm not looking to appeal to the niche analytics hockey crowd per se. I'm looking to appeal to hockey fans and do that in a unique and interesting way. So if you're talking to coaches, players, all of that, and I think media is a great barometer because you really have to simplify things in that medium. You have to be able to put it in hockey terms. So I'll say a lot of the time, some of the best use of analytics, and whether it's work that I'm doing or work that my company does with our media partners, is when no numbers are used at all, or maybe one number, but that's your departure point for a conversation. And an example I'll give is something that has been talked about a fair bit in the Tampa Rangers series is Andrei Vasilevsky giving up a lot of goals, high blocker. Now, in a short sample size, there's probably not much to read into that, but it is a big disparity in the playoffs from everywhere else in the net. And if you go back to the regular season, it was also the area that stood out. So, what I thought was great was a couple days ago on NHL Network, Dave Reed and Mike Johnson were the analysts on there. They showed the graphic, they showed that data for about 30 seconds and just says, here's what it is. And then you had two players talking about why that could be. And then it was just hockey talk from there on, right? Well, there's a lot of one-timers that come from that left side where Zibanejad is, and that's high blocker, and maybe that's part of it. Or maybe it's part of the way he moves, or, screens in front of the net. But it just turns into a hockey discussion. So that's where I think analytics can really be used as without those numbers and without the access to that data, it wasn't something that was being picked up by anybody's eye. So it gave you the great entry point to then go out and have a hockey discussion. And I think if it's coaches, players, whatever it might be, same idea, right? If you're a coach talking to players, you've got their attention span for maybe 5 or 6 minutes, right? In a meeting, they're not long. That's where you could use a little splash of data and then get into the hockey conversation.
I'll have you know that yesterday, if you didn't see it, Karl Schwarzenbrunner, who works for the German Federation, he said coaches have 7 minutes. All research says you've got 7 minutes to keep the attention span of your hockey players, and then you lose it. So a 40-minute video, don't forget it. Don't even try it. So an interesting thought. He swore that there's a lot of research on that.
And Mike,
yeah, sure.
That's a good coach. You can have a best time if you're a bad coach.
That's right.
And I would say, talking about TV here, you don't have 7 minutes talking to a viewer. That's what we understand working with analyst guys, that some of them, they haven't worked in TV before. They were from the numbers. And that was a big challenge because they want ifs and buts. And when you're talking in TV, it's not a gray area. It's black or it's white. You have to tell the story. You have to do it short, and you have to tell it so everybody understands. So you have to make it much more easier than it is. So you haven't gotten the 7 minutes. You have to take away a lot of things just to make people understand, because it's so complex otherwise.
And Björn, and the thing is, working in the TV in Sweden, you have even 3 categories of viewers. You got a free TV, which is everyone, mom and dad, your grandmom, everyone. And if you're going to start talking statistics and numbers to those kind of viewers, you have a short span of attention, very short span of attention. But if you have those, if what we call nerds in that are watching NHL at 2:00 in the mornings and until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, you have a certain amount of time that you can have, and you could split the numbers and you could move some pictures in. And for instance, the blocker situation of the Vasilevsky, which we have Zibanejad score, that's a perfect match. If you can show those 2 figures and the picture in one, you got it made. But it's very rare that you find those circumstances and you have that amount of time that you could show them to those 3 different categories of viewers you have.
Yeah, and I think,
Go ahead.
yeah, I think too, one of the reasons why conferences like this are so valuable is that I think, to Mike's point, this is actually a question about effective communication, right? We could be talking about anything. And here at a conference like this, we get to learn and explore and really understand new ideas. And I think that that's one of the mistakes that we can make, and that coaches can make as well, is someone's telling you to use a number or to use a fact or a stat. And if you don't really understand it, you can't apply it. You can't communicate it effectively to your audience. And I think the other question that we have to challenge ourselves in is remembering that communication isn't necessarily our agenda of push, push, push. It can't just be push. It also has to be putting in the work to make sure it's received. To Håkan's point, right, is that we have to contemplate who is our audience. How do they like to receive information? This is where pictures and video have been such a great step for us, even in written form, because it is true, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we could give them the whole diatribe in written form of Vasilevsky's weaknesses and strengths, or we can show them 5 goals against and where they've gone in comparison to other spots upon which he's shot, right? So I think that it's understanding our audience. It's making sure we use all the tools available to us to communicate. And, this is what I see effective coaches do as well. It's always been my perspective that unless a player is really asking for data, those numbers don't enter into a conversation with a player. You're using those numbers and information from your in-team analysts to understand what messages need to be communicated to your team or your player. And then you're sitting down with your team or your player or your special teams. And then again, through video or whatever form of communication that player enjoys, teaching them the lessons that you learned from the data. And I'm sure we've all had these experiences. You can ask a player 15 different ways about a play or an opponent or a game, and you get some of the standard answers. But if you sit down and watch film with a player, the conversation usually becomes so much more rich. And it's again because we're communicating with them in a way they prefer and which they are stronger in. It connects their ability to explain what they see. So I think ultimately understand what you want to talk about. Make sure it's tailored to the people that you are talking to, and don't force something that isn't there either because you don't understand it or because your audience doesn't want it or doesn't want it in that way.
Alison, if I build on that, Håkan talked about the idea that in the public television opposed to the pay television in Sweden as a different knowledge base or active hockey fans. What's the more of curiosity? Seattle, what's the hockey base out there, and then did you have to think to tailor your communication to a higher or a lower hockey lover market?
Well, we do have a very strong base of technology with a lot of the businesses that are headquartered out of here. So I think it has been great to see a skewing of, people who are embracing this idea of looking at the game through data. But I think that what we are trying to do is to lock into the different passion points that people have and therefore connect them to the Kraken. So if we have really data heavy thinkers, it's our talk about data informed insights that bring them in. If we have people who love hockey, we're talking about the beauty of the game. Because, I always say as much as we can look at all of these numbers, we still can't necessarily predict, that pass that gets to the other opponent's stick that then is the breakaway. We can't necessarily predict all these things, maybe just yet, but we can't. We have to allow for the magic that hockey still has. And so to answer your question specifically, I try not to go too heavy data ever. That's usually just been my philosophy. Like Mike said, there might be just one number, or maybe there's a table as a reference. But it is in terms of always bringing back the message in language that is approachable, accessible, and is informed by data, but not necessarily data centric.
How often do you guys on TV say, "Oh my goodness, there's nobody that just understood what I just said"? Does that ever happen to you guys?
Every day. No,
I would never admit it. I would never admit it, but yeah, it happens.
Yeah, I go. So I work for the NHL Network, right, on air. And if you're watching the NHL Network, you have subscribed to it, and you are probably a real hockey fan, right? So I think I understand that, and I think I can go a little bit farther. I think when you get into models is where you can lose a lot of people. Expected goals. I hear it all the time from our clients that are analysts in the media as well. They just want to understand more. But what's an expected goal? There was there was an analyst this year this was so good. It was the Detroit broadcast, and they do such a good job there. Ken Daniels and Mickey Redmond. And Ken said something about expected goals, and Mickey said, "Expected by who?"
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a good line. Just it's there's a long way to go, but I try to peel an onion without misrepresenting the information, right? So expected goals is a phenomenal place to end because it's factoring in all these other things that we talk about. It's really just goal probability. But a lot of people that might get lost on, okay, well, does shot location from the slot, from the inner slot, does that tell the same story without misrepresenting it? Well, it does. Okay, I'll use that because people can understand, well, I know what that is and I know what those shots are. So I try to kind of peel it back as much as I can without getting away from the real truth of the story. But I think I've gotten better at this, but definitely earlier in my career, I would go a little deep on the numbers or on the certain kind of metrics that maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with. And I'd watch it back after and be like, I could barely understand what the hell I was talking about there.
Björn, you've talked to me a lot about this, about making sure people understand and don't use the terminology that's not there. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, but I mean, you're gonna lose people if they don't understand. And going into the numbers, they're unfamiliar territory for a lot of them. I mean, as Mike said, the guys watching, I mean, NHL Network or watching Hockey Labbet, that they're watching a lot of hockey, but you have to talk to all of them. And if you're going to keep them watching, have them interested, you have to talk so they understand. So I really see the importance of, I mean, making the story behind the numbers, not talk about the numbers. The numbers can be interesting, but you can show them or show some of the numbers and then make them, why does it count? Why is that interesting? And I mean, we got a couple of interesting cases from Labbet. I talked to you guys earlier about a couple of years ago. We had Brynäs, who had a terrible power play, and Erik Wilderoth, who was the analyst at that time. He's now representing Färjestad, and I think you guys had him on the show some other day here. He looked at the numbers of the Brynäs power play, and he also could see how the passes, how they were passing their passes. So we can see that they were passing around, nothing into the hot areas and nothing like that. So we talked about that, and we can see where they were giving their passes. And just a couple of weeks after that, Brynäs got the best power play, I think, in the league because they changed it. So we learned, and I talked to the coach a couple of weeks after that, and he said, "Yeah, we talked about the same thing." He didn't say he watched the show. I think he did, but it was the same thing that actually led to them going from the worst power play to the best power play because we could see from the AI what they were actually doing out there.
Håkan, I'm going to send this question to you, but obviously others can answer. When we talk to the other people that are in the business, they continually say that analytics are for the coaching staff. And I asked them, what do you mean the players aren't interested? The players don't understand, or it's not there, or I mean, it's all about helping the coaches make better choices. And they come back to that time and time again. And I asked, are you really sure? And I'm interested in your play on this, Håkan. aren't the players the one we're trying to make better? And shouldn't they be try to understand the different, not the numbers and say, but what the numbers are saying? And why can't they do their own filter or translation of the numbers?
I guess that's one of the main problems actually, because they don't trust the numbers really, not yet, because they see the problems in them. They can see the different aspects, the different situations, the different question marks behind them all the time, because they often have they have an eye point from where they stands, and then they see the people who are doing the numbers having a different view and a different situation which they calculate the numbers from. So I don't believe, or as a player, they don't want to use the numbers that not in favor for them. But if they have the numbers they can see favor them in contractual discussions or in a discussion with the coach. I hated when video came into ice hockey because I couldn't tell the coach I didn't do that, because he said, yes, you did. I could have it. You could see it here on video. That was the worst. My career ended there, actually, as a player. But and I think we're somewhere there between these figures and the analytics. You know, if the figures, if the numbers doesn't benefits the players, you don't really believe in them, or you don't want to believe in them, but because you often when you're on the ice, you sort of think and you sort of try to act in a positive way for the team. And if you got numbers that tells you the difference, you get skeptic. Did I really do that? So I could actually
But the
see
number can also lie.
that. Probably did back in the days when I played. But I would be. I guess it's a kind of a program, an idea for a new program actually in a TV show, not Hockey Labbet, but in somewhere else, or in Hockey Labbet. If you could do some, actually put the numbers into cuts from games and sort of evaluate and sort of discuss and sort of explain them. If you could find that kind of program, and you find one of the numbers, you explain them every program or something like that, you could easily have a much quicker understanding for what the numbers can do for you as a player, or as a team, or a coach, or an agent, or whatever.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that, I think Håkan makes an excellent point. In one of my favorite pieces that I wrote for the Kraken last year, former NHL player JT Brown is our color commentator on the broadcast, and he is exceptional in his own right, but has also really embraced learning more about what the data tells us about a game. And one of the pieces we wrote was, he came to me after a game and he said, I saw the expected goals value, they're wrong. That's not the game I watched. And so we went through chances, and he as a player said, because we knew what was in the model that we were using, he said, this isn't considering this. This isn't considering this. It's not measuring that. And so I think one of the reasons that we need to be aware of players' hesitancy is that we need to acknowledge what our data doesn't tell us yet. There's so much in the game of hockey that we still cannot yet measure publicly, that it is true for a player to say, well, I know you looked at that number, but it doesn't consider coverage. It doesn't consider pressure. It doesn't consider the play before the shot, for example. So I think that we need to be really aware that when we advocate for data, we also need to own the questions that still exist around so many of the measures that we love and that I believe in, but that still have room to mature.
That's a really good point. And I think not so much now, maybe earlier and only in certain pockets, but there is a degree of hockey analytics, the community, whatever you want to call it, that is pretty adamant that what they're looking at and what they're doing is the way to do it, right? And then it becomes a us versus them type of discussion, which I don't think benefits either side. And the same on the other side, where if it's just too much, well, it doesn't do this, so it can't be worth anything. Well, you're losing value there as well. I think if both sides recognize that nothing is perfect, obviously, but maybe it can be better, then you can have value in a lot of this. And back to the only the value for the coaches thing. It's a great tool for coaches, no question about it. It's a great tool for finding value in currently undervalued players, for managers, for player acquisition. I've worked personally in my career with players from a development standpoint using data to help improve their game. I've had players come to me and ask for that. So there are players that are interested in it. I know managers are certainly using it, and coaches as well. I've worked on contract negotiations with agents as well. So it's being used in just about every facet of the game. But again, I'll go back to communication, where if the information isn't being communicated effectively, then it would be easy for a player or someone else in hockey to look at it and say, well, I'm not getting value out of this. I don't get it. I think that's a huge part of it.
I would say also there's a big trap in there. I mean, that's great if the guy's taking it the right way, but I know some guys in Sweden actually had a player who's played in Skellefteå and then in Växjö, and they were talking about he was being a Corsi guy because he was so into the numbers. He was shooting everything to the net. And he said, "Oh, my Corsi is great." I mean, that was kind of early in this. He didn't score, he didn't do anything, but his numbers were great. And we also had teams in Sweden. The Corsi was phenomenal, but they were only shooting from outside. And come on, you can't score from there.
Well,
yeah.
There's always ways to trick the system.
Yeah.
If we look at when you're on TV and you're trying to show things, if we go back a couple of years, it was statistics, numbers. You put the 3.72 goals save percentage, 96%. In the last couple of years, we've had colors and we've had striping and we can do different things on the ice with both colors, numbers, circles, highlights. What's going to happen next? How is this with analytics going to take us to the number? Are we going to be seeing numbers running up and down and people moving, or what do you think is going to be the next step with presentation on TV that the four of you do?
I think the main thing is actually to have numbers that are adequate, that are not manhandled, as I call it. I think it may be a better word for it, but if you can have a machine-wise to get all the numbers, the right numbers, that can be shown on the screen with a delay of 2-3 seconds, or when you would like to have them as a color commentator, for instance, because that's the problem today. You're going to get the statistics perhaps 5-6 minutes late, or in the intermission, or behind the game, after the game, or something like that. But you can't do it really at the instant that you would like to have it if you find a situation. And as I said before, if you could interact, you could have the figures and you could have it on a cut from the game, from the right kind of play. That's the next thing, I think. When you write on screens and all things, they're out there. But now you have to have some more figures, numbers, and pictures to sort of interact with each other. If you do that, I would be pretty happy to work for that channel.
And I think also...
Oh, go ahead, Björn. Sorry.
No, but I don't think the numbers, as we talked about, they're not the most interesting thing. They can be, but the interesting thing is we can tell the story behind it and why it's important. So if we can use the number and analyze it better, and have analysts working for the TV companies, especially in Sweden, we don't have that usually. But I mean, it's the regular color guys who's having the numbers, but we're not experts on analyzing them. You can do that, and you can use everything with the graphics and everything like that to make it more understandable to people. I think that's going to be a huge thing. And as Håkan says, doing it, I mean, up to speed to the game, it's going to go faster.
Yeah, the live speed has to be a part of it for sure. I was just covering the Western Conference Finals, so we're in Denver for games 1 and 2, and this wasn't on the broadcast, but it was on their video board at center ice. They had, if whoever's on the ice, there's 10 little boxes at the bottom, and guy would come on and it'd show his time on ice underneath. He'd go off, he'd disappear, a new guy would come on. I thought that was a pretty cool thing to be able to see during a game. There's more information on the sidebar as well. I think, I won't speak for you guys in Sweden or you in the US, Alison, but in Canada, fans are not going to be receptive to a very intrusive broadcast, whether it's visuals or numbers. It's pretty we like it the way it is. Maybe put shots on the graphic, but let's not get crazy and go too far overboard. Frankly, I'm kind of that way too. So I wouldn't want to see too much of that. But visualizations, I think there's a lot of work that could be done. Like one thing I think about is a power play starts, right? So you get that little break and play, maybe 20 seconds if it's not going to commercial. You could show an overhead shot of the ice and put a heat map of where that power play shoots from, typically, right? So you get Stamkos with that red spot over where he is, and you get Kucherov. And I think you could do something like that where you could say, hey, this is where the puck's probably going to be shot from, and this is who's going to be doing it, and boom, you're into the play, as a way to give fans just that little anticipation of what to watch for.
I also think, oh, sorry, Alison.
Yeah, I was going to echo actually what you just said, Bjorn, and Mike too. I think visualizations is the next step. And I think that what's going to be very important for those of us on TV is to educate people on what is informative versus what is predictive. We're going to see a lot of data start to come out, in my opinion, related to betting, right? At least in North America and the States. So speed is interesting. Do we know for sure if it matters, and if so, why? Other than the obvious intuitive example. But I love Mike's example. What came to mind exactly is I'd love to be able to put an overlay of even where Mika Zibanejad shoots from on the power play, right before they set up. Or there was a really cool visual from the Colorado-Nashville series, I believe this year in the US, where in a break and play, they actually overlaid the shot map on the actual rink on the broadcast. And again, this is showing fans and viewers what matters. And back to what we talked about earlier, that's a really, really easy way to start to bring in the casual viewer into the kinds of stories analytics can tell in a very approachable way.
Yeah. But, and I also think that we have to recognize what are the most interesting paramedics, or because there's so many numbers. I don't know, Mike, you might know how many figures do Sportlogic have. I mean, is it 200, 300? You can see entries, exits, and everything that you can show. If you're going to talk about everything, we won't understand ourselves. I mean, we have to pick, I guess, a few of them so that we can educate to the audience, so they understand that it's the familiar numbers and terms that we use.
Yeah, the key ones, like Alison talked about, right? And not overwhelming them. I mean, do we track what percentage of cross-ice dump-in rims that the attacking team recovers? Yes. Do I care? No, I don't. Oh. So it is what matters for sure. That's the key. And like I'll bring all of this back to one thing, which is I think what we're all trying to do when we're broadcasting to an audience is you're trying to get them engaged. And the greatest way to get people engaged is to appeal to them emotionally. So we see this all the time with human interest stories, right? This guy, and he works with this charity, or this girl, she's doing this community work, and they're players, and then you feel like, okay, I kind of know them a little bit. I'm invested. I'm interested in who they are as a person, and now I'm interested in who they are as an athlete. We can do the same thing with analytics and with numbers, which is, okay, I know more about this player now. I know to watch this player because he's the best at the league at this thing that I wasn't aware of. And then I'm watching the game and I'm watching the player do it. And that's cool because I feel like I know something now that I didn't before. I think that's when you can grab people that way, and numbers can help you do that. Then you're not only attracting new people, hopefully, but you're certainly keeping the people that you have.
And you Mike and Alison, may I ask a question there, regarding the numbers you're watching? Do you watch a game? Do you see a pattern and then look for the numbers? Or do you look for the numbers, see a pattern, and look for it on the ice? Which one comes first?
Go ahead, Alison.
Well, I have all the numbers up. I'm not going to lie, but my priority is the game. And then looking to the numbers, and sometimes I'm like, yep, see, it's what I saw. And sometimes it's, oh my gosh, now that's watching the game. I really, really, really connect with what Mike was just saying about player level. So in my prep or in my research, there might be something that I learn about a player from the numbers that I then watch for in the game. But I'm a big believer in eye and data. And if the game is happening, it's game first, check numbers, game first, check numbers. That's me.
Yeah. I've never actually watched a game. I just live in my basement and look at spreadsheets. So that's my approach.
Oh, it looks a nice basement.
Yeah, it's very nice. Yeah. Alison took the words out of my mouth. I think about the prep. And that's the biggest thing for me is I prepare as much as I can. I try to know as much about how these teams play. If we're talking about a playoff series here, what's happened, why it's happened, what players are doing this, what players are doing that. And then more often than not, then once you're that prepared, you go into the game, and a lot of these things tend to play out. Not always, but a lot of the time. And then you're seeing it, but you've got that base knowledge already in your head. Very similar, I would imagine, to how a coach would prepare, right? Just from a different angle. But the same as Alison. Yeah, you're watching the game because it moves so fast. Like I'm in the press box, I'm looking down at some numbers for 30 seconds, and you're missing up and down the ice 3 times. So you have to be watching the games, but the intermission is great to kind of go over numbers as well, just see if it's validating what you think you're seeing. And then you know, as you detect trends throughout the game, that's where someone like Alison could say, okay, you know, 5 minutes left in the period, I've noticed this thing. I'm going to look at some numbers and I can talk about that in an intermission now, or the end of the game, whatever it may be. But a lot of it is pattern recognition, either from watching what's happening on the ice or the numbers. To form your analysis that way, for me.
I got to commentate United States against Finland in the World Championship about 12 years ago, and it was off tube, a minute after. So I could always tell exactly what was going to happen when we were actually
That's the best
commentating.
game ever, eh?
Came to a power play, and I remember saying, "Watch out for Teemu Selänne. He's going to be on the back post, and he's going to score from there 3 times." Hat trick from there 3 times. Everything was right.
Put that on the demo reel.
Let's talk about ground truth. It came up yesterday when we were talking with the industry. How true and how accurate is this? Håkan, you talked a little bit about this, that the players don't buy it if they get a score or have a number that doesn't fit their feeling. I don't care about it. It's not important. Do you guys spend time to understand how true things are, or do you just accept them?
Yeah, I mean, you
Alison,
have to.
You're saying yes.
Yeah, you have to. And, you know, this is what I was saying before. You know, I have not played the game at any meaningful level because beer league certainly doesn't count. But, you know, I need to learn from players about what they see, how they process the game. And, you know, as I mentioned in my example earlier, the people who are doing this work and who are driving our data revolution even today are doing as best as they can and are doing amazing work, but we also know there are limits. And so I am very, very keen to understand what did this game look like to you that this number didn't capture? And if someone comes to me and says, I think you're missing something here, I'll be the first person to say, cool, tell me why. And I will admit, you know, there have been some numbers over the course of my career where if I didn't understand them or didn't philosophically agree with what they were doing, I was not going to use those, because it's important for me, like I said, to really understand and be able to apply the data that I'm going to use in my analysis.
I think it's very.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it's very important to understand that everything that's the most of it, I would say, is manhandled the right word to use? It's often the figures are often taken care of by men who's writing them down in somewhere on a machine.
Manually tracked.
Manually tracked. Thank you. And as far as we don't have the chip in the puck or chip on the players that could actually say that those aren't touched by man. Then we can't say that those figures are truth, really. And I guess that's one of the keys why there's working so hard to get the chip in or a chip in the puck or everything, because of the betting companies. That's the figures that they want to have. And that is out from a business perspective. That's what they're looking for. But we get the better figures we have, better numbers we have, the more truth we got into the game and the statistics as well. So that must be the next step, really, to see when the NHL get there. I think you have a Finnish company, you have some other companies who's working that way, Sportlogic probably as well, with artificial intelligence or with chip or whatever. But the one who's going to show us the real true numbers they are really getting the uppmärksamhet.
Attention.
Mike, attention. Thank you. Because then no one can use that variable and say, well, those figures are not true. So that's what we're expecting or waiting for now, I guess.
Björn,
Yeah, accuracy is a huge part of it. Sorry, if I can.
No, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, accuracy is so important, and this is why, a company like mine, we work with so many teams, and we work with the SHL, etc. It's there's a human component to it, obviously, but it's subjectively tracked using AI and machine learning and computer vision software. So it's not somebody in a press box with their interpretation of it. The other thing too, though, is we can count lots of numbers, right? And there is a degree of interpretation, and Alison touched on this, talking about player speed as an example, where or player skating distance. I don't know this because we didn't track it, but I'll use Mario Lemieux as an example. I doubt he was the guy that skated the most distance in a lot of hockey games. It didn't make him a bad player. And I watch guys fly around the ice all the time that are never near the puck. So there is interpretation that's required also, right, to get the meaning of what this information means. The truth of how accurate is it, how much can I believe it, but then the meaning of how to interpret it also. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned when I got into working in analytics full time, and this isn't to, besmirch analytics or data whatsoever, but understanding what you don't know and understanding what the limitations are and accepting it and finding ways to fill those gaps in make you such a better analyst, because you're not just looking at this and saying, well, that's what that number says, so that must be what it is. And I say all the time, I'm not interested in trying to be an analytics expert or anything like that. I'm trying to be the best hockey analyst I can be. And I understand the value in data, and it's significant in my view. But when you know the limitations and you can try to fill in the gaps, I talk to people in hockey all the time for that reason, because they have a perspective, like Alison mentioned, talking to people, they have a perspective that's so valuable. And when you can combine the two, it's just you're trying to put as much of the puzzle together as you can.
It's really interesting. We had a story here from Sweden a couple of years ago, a team that was in the bottom of the table, about thinking about what are the numbers that we're analyzing and then what we appreciate in our team. And they were having a new coach, a new analyst, and they were talking about new stuff. They were having their own account, what they were counting and what they were liking and what they wanted to play, but everything was really, really bad when we looked at their numbers. They were not winning games, but they were saying, "Oh, our numbers is great." So you have to, I mean, the numbers you can. Okay, so it's like our team's going to be having the most offsides. That's great. I mean, it was like almost they were trying to figure something out, but nobody else understood it, and the points weren't showing they were right either. So you have to make sure what you're
talking about right now, and Sean Tierney talked about this a little bit yesterday from Sportlogic, is that their goal is going to be that the team itself can pick out what's the most important and then put their truths to that. Now, then we talked about I think it was an NHL or a baseball team, a Major League Baseball team that had 30 or 32 analysts that do that, and he said immediately they're doing their own analysis, they're doing their own thing, they're not following our our codes or our analytics, they're doing their own, they're making their own. And this is going to be, in my world, a difference between coaches, countries, and styles in the future. The way you use analytics to drive your coaching style, the way you put your team on the ice, how many minutes your best players or don't play. So certainly that is going to be an interesting truth, because as you say, your numbers aren't very good. Well, you're looking at the wrong numbers, because our numbers are over here, not over here.
But if your numbers are great and you're not winning, that's
exactly.
a problem,
That's what I'm talking about.
But it is a good point, though, because there's no one way to win in hockey, and there's no one way to score goals, right? And every team is made up of different types of players and managers that value different types of players. So there are things, look, if you're constantly on the wrong side of an expected goal model, you're not going to win. That's a truth, right? We know that. take two good teams, Carolina Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, both very good year over year, play very different ways. Carolina dumps the puck out. They dump the puck in more than anybody. Florida rarely ever dumps the puck in. They skate it in different ways, but they're trying to accomplish different things. So if you judged the Carolina Hurricanes on their rush chances and their zone entries, you'd say, well, they're a bad team, when they're not. If you judge Florida on their dump-in retrievals and you know what I mean, like that. So there is room certainly for being quote unquote good or bad in different things, and yet still being able to be successful. That's where it's important. What I call the difference between a game report and a style report. And I've talked to coaches about this. Game report, fundamental truths, things that every team has to do well in or you're not going to win. Style report, what are we trying to do and are we achieving that goal?
They actually have something called a style report.
That's what I call it.
Okay.
Looking good report.
I don't know what they call
Looking
it.
good report.
Yeah. Are we our identity report? Are we
or
doing what we're trying to do?
our KPIs, our key performance index of
Exactly.
something like that.
But what Mike mentioned now is very interesting, actually, because if you see the recent World Championship and the style that Finland has won the different championships with, and you sort of see the North American style and the intensity of the game, the transactions and transition game and things like that, they're quite a different style in Europe and in North America nowadays. And I seem to see that the North Americans are looking a lot more at the European style or the Finnish style. You see more trap game. You see more when you start with the puck behind the net and you have the left wing lock system and things like that. Yeah, the breakout systems, and they're all sort of going back 20, 25 years or a little bit ahead of us. We sort of gained a different model now of ice hockey. Could that be that you have the style from the different coaches, or has the numbers in some way sort of transfer the game into a different style due to the fact that they see that this is a more effective style?
Yeah, to me, I think that what Mike is saying too, I wholesale agree with, because data alone is not going to dictate. You're having access to data is not going to tell you that your team is going to be good or not. And this is, again, the eye test will always matter. It's the questions you ask of the data and how you apply the answers that you get. And that's this idea of style or identity. And that's the difference of the management. That's the impact of coaching. We could all four of us could have the same 20 data points, and based on what we value and therefore what we apply and tell our team to do, that's our impact. So the data sits level to everyone, but this human intervention is what determines the value or lack of value we get out of this data, and then ultimately the success of our team.
Mm-hmm.
Good to hear.
Come
There's
back.
still hope.
Quite
There's still
boring
hope.
when we have a program that's going to tell it. Yeah, but if we have a program that's going to tell everybody what is a good way to play the game and just tells us play this way, that's quite boring. We don't have to have hockey anymore. I mean, we love it at different styles, and we love that we can see it different ways, and we can play it different ways and win in different ways.
Well, it's funny because this has really been going on forever. One of the things when the pandemic hit, and this was before the pandemic actually, there was just some downtime. The Summit Series, a big thing in Canada, probably less so in Russia and other places where they weren't involved. But I wanted to track that series because I was always fascinated by it. My dad talked about it all the time. It's this big thing in Canada, the Summit Series. So we ran our data on the Summit Series and found two things that are probably not shocking. But one, the Soviet team possessed the puck significantly longer in those games than the Canadian team. And that's the difference of the styles of play at the time, right? The European style versus what was happening in North America. And they had great success. I mean, this won 8 games. It was this tremendous series. Canada had a significant advantage in terms of shot quality, of just getting inside, getting into the net front area and getting those shots. That's maybe that more heavier style of hockey or whatever you want to call it. And you end up with a great series that was decided, in the final moments. But two very, very different ways to play the game. Obviously, one side valued one more than the other and vice versa. No right or wrong necessarily, but that's I guess an example going back 50 years almost, or whatever it is, of how long this debate of how should we play to achieve that result has been going on.
Truths. If I try to end it here with this last little piece, they talked about letting fans say what is the truth, or a bunch of hockey coaches, or someone else who has a lot of knowledge in the game. Maybe it's TV analysts or TV commentators that's there. But that was a good pass. That was not a good pass. And trying to find out so the data can match what people think. Now, that would be something for all of you to just love, to be able to, hey, fans, let's create our interpretation of the game. But it seems so far-fetched for me. Does that feel like something that you could accept, that we'd allow the fans to say what was good? I guess they're the ones there watching, so why not? Any thoughts from anybody?
Not when it comes to penalties, that's for sure.
I see this whole idea of letting fans, and the one big problem is time. I mean, it has to be just in time. It has to be right there. The data has to travel extremely fast so people can get on their computers or their cell phones, whatever it may be, and say that was a good pass, or that was a good shot, or that was something else. Because just as you're saying, one team dumps the puck off the glass and another team tries to keep it in their possession. So it becomes different. And we're getting back to the ground truths. What is truth? What is good? Who is the best hockey player, or the best at this or best at that? Well, who's the best skater? Well, you could probably pick out about 10 names and certainly argue for each one of those 10 in a different way. Something that I thought that is a little...
Well, I think it's the other way around, actually. I think there's the numbers that can help us understand why a pass. I mean, we can all see the obvious pass. That is a good pass. That's no problem at all. Everybody going to like it. But if we can learn people that this is a good pass, it doesn't look that hard, or it looks really hard, but or it's not good at all, then I think we can go the other way around. And I think also that's one perspective of why statistics like this are good. I mean, we have always loved the guys who's scoring the most or making the best passes, or that we see the most on the ice. But now we can maybe evaluate the player from a defensive point of view, or we can see other things that we can measure and like about them.
Let me take.
And I don't know.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Håkan.
I don't know if really if the numbers are for the supporters, actually, because the fans of the game, they're sort of emotional into the game more than the figure-based truth. I don't know. Is it Jakob Nicholson? You can't handle the truth. Did they say that in this movie? And that could be for the fans. You can't handle the truth, actually, because you can't really appreciate the numbers in that way that the coaches or the players do. But I think are in it for the heart. They're in it with the heart.
But the interactivity between the fans and letting them be a part of it and describing the game is also something very enticing and interesting to think about, to have them be a part of it, thinking, I was able to be a part of the game and how it's interpreted.
And I think the one thing that fans are going to like, or liking or enjoying right now, is that they can see what I talked about earlier. Is this sustainable? Okay, my team is winning. Is it good or is it bad? I mean, we can win 3 games in a row, but we can play bad and we're not going to win in the long run. Or, I mean, we had Leksand this year in the Swedish league. I think they lost their 3 or 4 first matches, and every analyst at our place and the numbers said, okay, Leksand is fine. And after those matches, okay, they just started winning, and they were a top team a long bit into the season. But it's easy to get panic after 4 straight losses in the beginning. But okay, they're fine actually. So I think that's something that the fans going to use and enjoy. And they can't go into all of the specifics, of course, and all the numbers. That's going to be too hard for them or us as well. But I think some of these things are really good.
And one thing I try to be aware of is I'll never forget this. A couple of years ago, I'm back at home watching a game with my friends who I grew up with, who I've known since I was 5, and they're having beers and watching the game. And they're yelling the fan stuff at the screen, right? Oh, this guy turned the puck over. He always turns the puck over. He's terrible, whatever. And I kind of know, well, he turns the puck over because he has the puck a lot because he's really good. And I'm not going to ruin their experience, though, and say, well, actually, his turnover rate is quite low compared to whatever. So it just was a good reminder to me that a lot of enjoyment for fans in sporting events, I think, comes from them being able to be their own expert. And sure, they're not going to be right all the time, and some will be more right than others, but they want to yell at the screen and they want to know that that guy's terrible and this guy's great in their own mind, and they don't always want to be corrected. So, I try to at least be aware of that, right, when thinking how I'm presenting things, and just being aware that, not every fan wants to always even know the right answer. For them, it's like their end of the day, I'm done work, I want to sit down, yell at the screen, and maybe that's all they want out of a game.
Mike, I was just going to tell the story. When I was walking down the stairs, I was the team president in Linköping, walking down with my wife, saying that was the worst something game our team has played. Yeah, we got lucky and we won 3-2, but we were terrible. And all the fans, this was a great game, the best ever. I'm like, nothing
Exactly.
worked tonight. It was terrible. But I kept my mouth shut and let them have their fun to go out and understand that, hey, 3 points in the game was important. We got into a different conversation yesterday. Who owns the data? And I realize that none of you are experts at you're not lawyers, and you don't understand, or you may not understand the legality of everything, and I certainly don't. But let's talk a little bit about, we talked about the teams owning it, if it's the provider that owns it, is it the player that owns it? Could a coach, after he gets fired, pick up the data and walk out the door with the data? Is it his data because it comes from his head or the coaching staff's working together? Who owns the data?
From my point of view, working as a CEO for a league for a couple of years, the league owns the data. The league, which is providing the means for the players, the teams, rent the arenas, if you rent an arena or you own arena, and if you pick up the numbers and if you provide the numbers, you have a business case, mostly towards the betting companies. Then, so I would say the league, which is the teams in the league, for instance. So you have to distribute the means that you get for the statistics or for the numbers. For the league to the teams, but for every season, the teams in the league and the league owns the data. That's my point. That's my vision.
Yeah, I think the difference there comes, and this goes back to this idea of style, if you will, is the competitive advantage that a team, be that an analyst, a coach, or whatever, develops their own model, right? Or their use of the data, and they find a value that they put a bunch of the data together and come up with a new metric, if you will. I think that those models are then owned at the team level if your team is doing things correctly, because I've seen that in most contracts, is that the work developed by individuals working for a team is then property of the team. But I also know of situations where a coach has developed a proprietary tracking tool or something like that, and they take it with them because it is not then owned by the team. But I think realistically, it ends up there's a second tier that is owned by teams, unless the team forgets to write their contracts properly.
So you're saying, now they hear the two of you, the employer, not the person who actually created through his or her physical ability the statistics.
That's probably a business. That's probably a business model, because the person taking getting the system to the team is often having a relation or a contract or whatever says who owns the or who should have a benefit from the system if they sell the numbers further on to the betting companies or wherever, TV or whatever.
Yeah, and I think your point is well taken. I think that a player owns the data in some way, and that they have a stat sheet or they have a career profile or a performance history that is the measure of their work. But from a business perspective, unfortunately, this is data that the league created the mechanism to acquire and then retain and then present back in some form. And so much like we don't own products that we maybe produce in different jobs that we've had, it ends up with the league or the team.
I mean, also the companies that collect them and give them to us. I mean, they've already been out there for decades, or for how long we play the game. But now it's the companies who's making us getting our hands on them also.
But that would then mean that if I started a company and I used some of the numbers that somebody else used and I created something new from those numbers, would I then own that?
Most likely not.
Yeah, you could license data from a company, right? Without outright owning it. I think a lot of it would, again, not a lawyer, depend on how it's written. And you know, Håkan and Alison talked about it. If it's written the way that it should be, or it traditionally is, then it would be owned by the league in the examples that they gave. But leagues can license information as well, and there's different ways to go about it, I guess, depending on what it is exactly that you're looking at.
It's that easy. I see it. I see a fight between the players and the teams. In my world,
not really.
The players. Well, Håkan, if I talk about the Swedish contracts, and this is only Sweden, they now can use their own face, the picture of their own face. They can also use their own name and sell that to any company that they want to. Now, some of them may have it can't be in disagreement with our main sponsors.
And things like
if
that.
Our main sponsors, Volvo, something trucks, and then we can't do it with a different kind of truck company or whatever it may be. But it's still, they have the right to use their own picture and their own name. Why shouldn't I be able to use my own data? And then the next question is GDP. Now, is that a Swedish translation, GDP, or do you guys use the same wording, GDP, the rights to
GDPR?
GPR, sorry. The rights to personal data, that you can take it from out of any system in Sweden if you don't want it to be there. So you could also go to your employer and say, hey, I want all my information and I want to take it with me. So that then does mean that it means that the teams do not own it, if that were the case. And I realize we're not lawyers. This is going to be something you guys are going to be talking on screen about. I know it, that you're going to be trying to explain this to everyone, that the player here or the player there is getting into a situation with that. Now, when it goes to betting companies, that's a different story, probably.
I think the main thing is there. If you're a player, you need a team to play on, and you need to play a team that has to play in a league to be interesting. The league itself is providing those numbers as team, league, organization to the business partner that you have in whatever business you're trying to make. The player could actually have their own faces, their own names, of course, but they couldn't be wearing the team jersey, for instance. It's like in the NHL as well. They couldn't use the logo from the league in any PR activities and things like that. But you own your own name, you own your own face, and you own your own statistics. But that's only your personal statistics. Whatever use you can have for those, you can't have them in a business model in the league, but you can have it on a CV or something like that. But I can't see that the player is going to have any sort of influence over the league statistics in the case of payments.
No other comments? Mike, you're in the middle of it. Is this a touchy topic?
I mean, in a way, but more than anything, it's just not something that I'm that familiar with. I think Håkan, based on his experience, could speak to it better than I could. So I'd love to offer more insight on it, but it's just not something that I'm. I can tell you, like, from an arbitration standpoint, as an example, in the NHL, there's data that's being done, produced publicly, advanced statistics. There's certainly private data as well, like the company that I work for, that's not admissible in an arbitration case because it's not league data. And there's very strict parameters on what you can and cannot use in an arbitration case. So it'd be an example kind of in general on what we're talking about. But it's not something that I've got great expertise on.
Fair enough. Just more of an interesting point, and I want to bring it up just because I think it's important. Women's hockey. How can we find ways to help women's hockey with analytics? We had a conversation about it yesterday, or a panel debate about it yesterday, and we discussed different things. And a lot of it is access to data, and having databases and things like that. But I'd like to hear what you think about it. And it's important due to the reason that if the hockey world is going to grow, we need both boys, girls, men, and women to love the game and want to watch the game. So, any thoughts?
I can't see any difference really between men and women in that respect. The numbers could tell us the same story for men as well as for women. They play on the same rink. They play in the same arenas. Some different rulings or rules regarding physical play and things like that. But I guess it's like Alison mentioned a lot earlier. It's a model. You have to find a model for what kind of figures they need or want, and for developing a better program for themselves. And I don't think it's any difference if you say boys, girls, men, and women. You can find a system. The coach can find a system that they need or will have to develop the team better.
Yeah, this is not a data question. This is a resources question, and this is a challenge to those who say they want to grow the game, that they need to give these teams and these organizations the resources to be able to capture the data and then use the data. The people that were on that panel are some of the best in that space, and I know they spoke far more eloquently to this, but there is a journalist right now covering the U18s here in the States who is doing it on her own accord. She reached out to 12 outlets that covered the original cancellation of the event, and only one responded to her, and that was a no. And we are not putting our money where our mouth is when we say we want to grow the women's game. And the resources can be there, but we need to have the ability to compensate them and give them the time by paying them to capture the data, to analyze the data. And there is very interesting work that can come out of this. There was a study performed last year by Alyssa Longmuir, Mike Murphy, and Shayna Goldman that actually revealed a difference in the importance of face-offs in the women's game as compared to the men's game. So there are some very, very interesting things we could learn. And, back to the earlier conversation about the differences in styles and the differences in the European game versus the North American game. What more could we learn about hockey if we truly invested in studying the women's game? And most importantly, when we are not investing the resources to track this information now, when so much growth is happening in the women's game, look at the careers we are missing to capture for historical purposes. Look, we talk about, can we go back and look at Mario Lemieux? Are we going to be able to go back and look at Marie-Philippe Poulin and say who compared to her? When we're having these conversations in women's hockey 2 decades from now, are we even going to have the data to look at who were the all-time greats? This data can be available. This is an issue of financial and time resources being dedicated to that space.
Yeah, well said. Our company, we've worked with the PWHPA on tracking different events, and I love the point you just made about even understanding the players that are great today. And Marie-Philippe Poulin, we tracked the Olympics, and there were so many great things. I'm going through this data of how we can articulate what a special player this is. And we need the networks to say, yes, we will buy a package the same way that we would buy an NHL package to promote what makes these players great. And I think there's even more of an opportunity with the women's game. Number one, to grow it, because so much of the fan base in hockey in general is female. It's a great game, and it's a game that is going to continue to grow, and that opportunity on its own is there. But to understand the game the way that Alison talked about, the differences in the game, it's such a great opportunity to learn more and to be able to show the fans these differences and take them inside what makes that game great as well. So that's, I very much agree. I think it's a matter of resources and certain outlets, I guess, putting the money up to promote the game the way that it should be promoted.
Björn, I know that you go to your boss at Seymour and start talking about the future. We need this next year, and we need this next year, and we need this next year. What can we see that we haven't seen this year from the 4 different networks or from the 4 different places that you all represent next season? Are you looking at it like Björn, like, I don't know, but I know that you had that conversation.
No, I don't know actually. I'd hope to have a lot of more of Hockey Labbet than I'm happy because they cut us down a bit this year. But I think Mike might know more about that. What is coming in Sportlogic and the programs like that, because I think that's going to be one of the keys. And I hope that in the future that we have analysts that are working closer to the regular games that are. I mean, our color guys that are. They're all former players or coaches or guys like that. The only guy we have like right now is Simon Brännström, who is working with Hockey Labbet, where they're not that close to the regular broadcast. So I think in the future, Sweden are far behind there because the teams, I guess a lot of teams don't have an analyst themselves in Sweden. Maybe a guy, or it's a goalie coach who also like the numbers. And we're only growing this here, and then we have to grow it in the media as well, because we are far behind, I would say.
Well, I think it's the same for our company, that you're investing more in new technicalities like angles on the cameras or better optics and things like that, better pictures actually, because TV is pictures. But all the graphics are they're starting to be more and more important, actually. As you say, the analytics will be the next thing, because now you got the plus minus, you got the time on ice, you got the goals, assists, and things like that. Those main 4 or 5 main statistics that you could actually show and that people would understand. So I guess the next thing is that the analytics is going to be shown and up to date, actually, live on air in some way. And I know the staff that we work with, we don't have an analyst. We, as color commentators, has to do our own analytics and bring them to the show every time. We don't have any assistants during the shows and things like that. So I could have when I grow a senior, which I should have done already, actually. I could have an assistant, perhaps. That would be the perfect way.
But also the problem here is that we're so young that I started Hockey Labbet with 3 guys there. It was Thomas Johansson, who was one of the guys. He's a former player. They took him, and he's the GM of Leksand now. And not only because of what he did in Hockey Labbet, but he was a color guy. And they had Petter Kahnbro. He's the analyst of Leksand right now. Okay, so we put in 2 other guys. So we have Erik Wilderoth as the analyst. Okay, mid-season here, Färjestad took him. So because we're so young, and so they see the guys on the TV, and then these guys can start to explain and what they can learn from it and what they can do with the numbers. Teams take them. So we're gonna have to hold them hard in the future.
or
your
maybe
show
that's
is
the way
too
to go.
successful.
Yeah, and I'm the only one left, so I don't know what to say about me. No one picked me up.
Alison, you live in probably one of the most largest tech areas ever. What can we expect from the Seattle Kraken and something that's going to happen next year that we haven't seen this year? Is there anything that you can talk about beforehand?
Well, we can't give away all of our secrets, but we're certainly looking to educate our fans more, first and foremost, on the key concepts. And we are lucky to partner with Sportlogic as well, of course. And we've developed a post-game scorecard of statistics that we've picked out and that we explain to the fans and give to the fans every game. So we're going to hopefully see an evolution in that. And I think for us specifically, we've seen, as you said, the market validate that they're interested in this kind of information. And, our team at Root Sports has just been magical in learning this game, learning the data that's available to them. And so I think we'll be able to, from a broadcast perspective, make better and more use of the information that we're getting both from the league and from a Sportlogic in our broadcast, so that we can continue to feed the hunger that we are so thrilled to be hearing from the fan base that wants more from a data side.
Yeah, I think it's more about just continuing to find the best ways to get the information. A lot of what already exists in as opposed to building more information. And we'll obviously continue to do that as a company. With the NHL and their puck and player tracking, that's going to continue to become something you see more and more on the screens also. But I think something that they need to be careful about, and that we're certainly careful about, is what are we presenting and why? Let's not just show numbers for the sake of showing numbers, because now we can track this thing. It's better tell the fans something meaningful about the game, the same way that a traditional analyst, when they speak, is hopefully telling the fans something interesting about the game, right? So, you know, I look at something as simple as the intermission graphic that you often see, right? Goals, shots, face-offs, hits, and block shots. Well, hits, face-offs, and block shots have nothing to do with an outcome of a game, really, ever. And in fact, some have a negative correlation to who's going to win or lose a hockey game. There's better information that can be on these graphics, and some of our broadcast partners put some information that we believe is more valuable to what's really happening in the game that matters. So I think we can continue to try to, you know, in broadcasting in general, give fans things that don't overwhelm them, but we know at this point are more useful for them to see, for them to understand the way the game's going. If shots are 30-30 and the score is 0-0 and slot shots are 20-10, there's a good chance that team's outplaying the other team, and you know, a good chance that they, not always, but they may score the next goal, and those are good departure points to have. So I think we can just continue to do better in building on, you know, a lot of what's always kind of been done in one way, because that's the way it's always been done. And Alison and her team in 1 year in Seattle have done an amazing job, I think, of using the information well, and not just here's a number because we have it, but here's a number because it's important. And Alison's so good at explaining that. That's why they've had such positive feedback. So more of that everywhere.
May I put a question to you too, Mike, and to Alison? Is in some way the statistics, the data that comes from the analytics and things like that, could that be a trigger for people to come to the arenas? Because you only give them on the display in the arena. You could do that on social media or something like that. Is that the way to grow a fan base?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, go ahead, Mike, please.
So I'll just go back to that example of being in Denver and seeing, and I didn't know any of this until I was in their building, but seeing what they were putting on their Jumbotron, center ice screen, whatever you call it. Yep. It was all quote unquote analytics, puck player tracking, very new information. Is that going to get someone to buy a ticket who wouldn't before? I probably not, I wouldn't think. But when they can learn about the game and watch that, it might make them more of a fan, and maybe that just bolsters the whole thing. It's a really good question, but second screen viewing, I think, is huge, right? So if you're in the rink with your phone and you can live track some of this stuff that you're not getting on a broadcast, you know, maybe that's, I could see definitely a lot of work could be done in terms of second screen viewing, where you could see things in real time that, you know, maybe isn't ever going to be on the general broadcast, but you're a fan of numbers and you want to see that, and you'll be able to.
Yeah, I agree with Mike's point there for sure, that I think sometimes in arena might connect a fan more strongly to an organization or to the game itself. You know, there are data points that I share on Twitter in game, and then if a fan is in the arena and also sees those on the Jumbotron, they can say, hey, cool, now I can get this information here too, or here instead, perhaps. But I do know that there are some organizations that are intentionally trying to make a connection between the game of hockey and the science and math communities. And those events historically have been, in my experience, outside of a game proper. But I think it could be a very interesting thing to say, we're basically going to have a nerdy game and bring in an emphasis on data and see if that doesn't connect people who maybe have had a stronger interest in the math and the statistics side of this to a sport that maybe they just weren't familiar with before.
They have StatCasts in baseball, right? They've been doing that for a long time. It's going to happen in hockey. I've talked to people at different networks that have. So it's a second broadcast of the same game. So if your network, let's say it's ESPN as the main game on, they'll have ESPN2 or whatever. They'll have a StatCast version. Different people calling the game. You're showing obviously the same game, but you're talking about it differently. You're showing different information, and it's more stats heavy. That will come to hockey. When, we'll see. Alison and I will be on it. It'll be awesome. But it'll come, and I think there's a lot of fans that would really enjoy that too, because again, if you're doing it the right way, and they do it well in baseball, it's not a bunch of formulas and stuff people don't understand, but you're just giving different kinds of insights and presenting the game in a different way.
In some way also, I mean, hockey it's an easy way to understand the game. It's not track and field where it's events all over the place. Or I mean, me watching baseball on site, I have a problem because I don't understand what's happening. I don't see it all. Watching it on TV, it's so good because I can understand, I can see, I can keep up with it. I mean, hockey is easy, but we also have to make sure that the people in the arenas don't miss out, so that everybody knows in the TV so fast. They know about if it was a goal or a good goal or a bad goal or what happened and how is this game. And you sit there, I mean, of course you got the atmosphere and you got everything like that in the arena, but you have to have this, I think, these things too.
Mm.
The thing is, nowadays it's very easy to see a hockey game and to stay at home and things like that. And we really have to watch out, because no one would like to see an empty arena. We had that a couple of years, and nobody experienced how dull that is. So and that's the thing. You have to provide a little bit extra for the guy who actually moving himself from his own TV chair and go to the arena to provide him with something extra, not just a hockey game. You have to have something else. Popcorn and beer is good, but you have popcorn and beer at home as well.
It doesn't cost as much either.
No, that's the point.
Alison, Mike, Björn, Håkan, 90 minutes goes fast. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your ideas. We really appreciate it from LINHAC, and hope to do this again next year. Thank you for participating.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.